right, good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us today for this month's Social Work Council meeting. We are excited to have a speaker with us today. Jenny Pearson is the Regional Outreach Coordinator for Hamilton Relay, the contracted TRS and CTS provider for Connecticut Relay. She lives in Maryland and covers outreach for such state programs such as Pennsylvania Relay, Mass Relay, and DC Relay, and she's been with Hamilton Relay for 6 years, previously providing outreach for Maryland Relay before taking on the regional position. So we are excited to have her. She will be announcing that we have a new Connecticut representative, that the contact information I see is right there, Damian Saunders. And there he is. So you'll be able to meet both of them. So after their presentation, those that want to stay on the call, as time permits, we will have a regular social work networking call where you can ask your questions, share your information, and that will end at 12:30. So Jenny, I will turn the call over to you. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. What a great introduction. I appreciate it so much. Really, really thrilled to be here with y'all today. Yeah, I said in my intro, I'm from Maryland, and in fact, I'm jumping on a plane this afternoon to head to Hartford to meet Damian in person for the first time tomorrow. So I'm super excited to introduce Damian Saunders, who will be the new Connecticut Outreach Coordinator and the manager of the equipment distribution program that we have going on, which we'll talk a little bit about later on in the presentation. So Damian, if you want to say hi, introduce yourself.
Yeah, nice to meet everyone. I live in Connecticut and I'm brand new to the company. So this is my second week going in, so I'm doing a ton of learning, and it's good to be a part of a company that, like, I live in the state, I grew up in the state, and then, I grew up at the YMCA and the Boys Club, so I'm excited to really explore, opportunities that can represent Relay and just be support for everyone. So nice to meet you.
Thanks, Damian, and once again, welcome to the team. So we're going to jump right into the presentation now. RelayConnecticut. I'm not sure how many of you are familiar with our program, but it's super exciting, particularly for folks who are experiencing age-related disabilities like hearing loss, vision loss, speech difficulties. RelayConnecticut can really be a huge resource for folks who are struggling with using a telephone. So a little bit about us. Our services allow individuals who are deaf, hard of hearing, deafblind, or who have difficulty speaking, communicate over the phone. We're going to talk a little bit about those specific services on the next slide, but a little bit about our history. You may be very familiar with the Americans with Disabilities Act that came into being in 1990. In 1993, the Federal Communication Commission mandated that telecommunications have to be accessible to everyone as well, which gave birth to state relay services. Fun fact, every state in the nation has a relay service, as well as all of our territories, just to make sure that everyone has the same accessibility to be able to use a telephone. Some of the services that we provide do require use of specialized equipment, which we'll talk a little bit about as well. And we are available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. So if you want to make that phone call to grandma on Christmas Day, you can absolutely use Relay to do that. So RelayConnecticut is provided by Hamilton Relay under a contract with the Connecticut Public Utilities Regulatory Authority. I always have trouble with regulatory. We are based in Aurora, Nebraska. We are a national company. As I stated, I'm from Maryland. We have outreach coordinators across the country that are working hard to get the word out about relay services. We've been providing relay services since 1991. And our company is committed to making sure that customers have choice, responsiveness, and services available to them at all times. So as I mentioned, we have a number of different relay services that are available to individuals to cover a wide variety of struggles that someone may be experiencing. You may be familiar with a TTY. We'll talk a little bit more about that coming up. Those who are familiar with Relay services may think that that is the one service we carry. But as you can see, we have a number of services available, including voice carryover, hearing carryover, speech to speech, which is a service for folks who may not speak clearly or who may have difficulty being understood. Services for folks who are deafblind. All of our services are available in Spanish as well. So those Spanish speakers who are struggling to use a telephone can also use Connecticut Relay. And caption telephone, which I did hear someone at the beginning of the call had just gotten someone set up in one of their facilities with a caption telephone. So yay, that's exciting news. It really does open up a world of possibilities for folks who are hard of hearing. So why is it called Relay? I can't tell you how many times I've been at an exhibit or giving a presentation and people see the word relay and they think it's some kind of race or a 5K walk. I can assure you that's not at all what it is. It's considered relay because we work with communication assistants who relay information back and forth between the relay user and the standard telephone user. And that little graphic is just showing you that they communicate back and forth and kind of are the go-between between two different types of telecommunications equipment. So our communication assistants, or CAs, as we like to shorten it, they facilitate all calls according to Federal Communication and Commission and state regulations. In other words, you can be very, very sure that all the information being relayed back and forth between the parties will remain confidential. They will also follow the relay user's preferences, which we'll get a little bit into in a little bit. And they never engage in personal conversation. There are times when, if you're receiving a relay call, the CA will introduce themselves, ask if you've had experience with the relay call. And once that information has been exchanged, they are simply there to facilitate communication. So we'll talk a little bit about TTY Relay. Essentially, you'll see on your screen a device that looks like a keyboard. There's a small screen on that particular device where text will show up as the person is receiving their response. TTY users type their messages and read the other person's responses. The CA actually is the one in between who is reading what the TTY user is typing to the individual who's using a standard telephone. When the person using a standard telephone responds with their voice, the CA types that information in, which is displayed on the TTY user's device. In order to reach out to someone who is using a TTY, you do not need to have a TTY yourself. You simply need to dial 711, provide the CA a number for that individual. They will facilitate the call. So as you can imagine, this is kind of a little different way to communicate than your standard telephone to telephone conversation. Oftentimes it's difficult to know when that person has stopped typing and is ready for your response. So we use the terms GA and SK to indicate when it is one person's turn to begin speaking. Go ahead is when you are finished with your statement. And SK is when you're finished with the conversation completely and you're ready to hang up. Before we get into voice carryover, did we have any questions about TTY services? Okay, I'm not hearing any. And if you do have questions throughout this presentation, feel free to put them in the chat. And if someone could just alert me that someone has asked the question, I can certainly stop and respond to that question as we're moving through. So voice carryover is for individuals who have hearing loss but prefer to use their own voice on the telephone. So think of this as somebody who maybe has lost their hearing over time. Maybe it's age related. These individuals grew up with hearing or have preferred to use their voice throughout their life, but they're not able to hear later on. So for this particular service, you can use a TTY or a specialized VCO telephone. The VCO user speaks directly to the other party, and the CA types what the other person is responding with for the VCO user to read on their device. So hearing carryover is kind of the opposite. So it's for individuals who can hear, but they're not able to speak over the phone, or they're not able to be understood over the telephone. You can also use a TTY for this particular service, or you can use a specialized HCO phone. The HCO user will listen directly to what the other person is saying, so they do hear your voice. And then they type their responses for the CA to voice on their behalf to the other user. As I stated earlier, speech-to-speech services is for individuals who have difficulty speaking or being understood over the phone. So think of someone who, just as an example, may have experienced a stroke and they have difficulty being understood, or they may have a slurred speech. For this particular service, there is no specialized equipment. The specialization is really with our CAs, who are specially trained to work with people who may not speak in a typical fashion. The CA will revoice and clarifies what the speech-to-speech user has said as needed. For deaf-blind services, these are designed for individuals who may have combined hearing or vision loss. We can provide specialized equipment like telebraille, which is a really interesting device where the little screen that you might see on a TTY actually has a little touchpad where they can actually use braille to read what you've said. The deafblind user types their messages to the CA, and they respond with the other party responds and are typed by the CA for the DBS user to read in Braille. So that's a really interesting service that is relatively new to our company. It's been around for probably about 10, 11 years. As I stated earlier, Spanish Relay, all of our services are available in Spanish. They are basically can do translation between Spanish and English. And it's important to note that these services are available to Spanish speakers who also struggle to use a telephone. This wouldn't be necessarily a translation service for anyone to use. It's specifically designed for folks who struggle to use the phone and that Spanish is their native language. Some information about our customer profile. This basically is information that the user will fill out and is filed with Connecticut Relay, so that when that individual uses Relay services to place calls, the CA knows specifically what their preferences are. You can put in automatic greetings and messages, your typical connection mode. So if you're using a TTY or if you're using a VCO phone, you can absolutely put that in there. The preferred services used on every Relay call. It's important to note for that one, because with, for example, speech-to-speech services, the individual making a phone call may understand that the person that they're going to be speaking with may be familiar with their speech patterns. And so they may not want the CA to relay every single thing that's said. They may want the CA to step in specifically when the individual that they've called asks for clarification. There are other situations where an individual is calling someone who they are not familiar with and would prefer not to have their voice transmitted at all. So the CA would actually only hear that person's voice and relay every single word that is said, as opposed to the user's voice being heard by the other person. You can also include speed dial numbers as well. So if there are individuals that you call particularly often, like family members, medical personnel, maybe even banking institutions, you can keep those numbers on your speed dial so that all you have to do is tell the CA who you would like to call, and they will place that call. Remote conference captioning is a relatively new service for Connecticut Relay as well. This allows people who have difficulty hearing what's said during conference calls to be able to read captions by a live captioner. The participants in the captioner access the call through a conference bridge or meeting link, such as the one that we're using today with Zoom. Real-time text is streamed, delivered right through the internet, so the individual can look on their screen and see exactly what's being said and who is actually saying it. They also will include information like if there's a lot of crowd noise or if someone is laughing. So that's really great information to have if you're not able to hear that. Caption telephone, we talked a little bit about that earlier. You may be familiar with it. Caption telephone is essentially a phone that has a screen on it. The individual is listening and speaking with the conversation on their own. However, they may miss certain things, certain sounds, certain words, certain voice types may be difficult for someone to understand. So while they're listening to what's being said, they're also reading captions of what's being said to them. So there are two options with caption telephone these days. You can have a captioning assistant that will be listening to the one side of the conversation that is to be captioned and revoicing what's being said into speech recognition software, which turns the text on the telephone for the individual to read. The FCC as recently as I believe it was last year has approved direct to speech recognition services. So the CA wouldn't necessarily be needed to facilitate those calls. The individual whose voice needs to be captioned, their voice goes directly to the software and it shows up directly on the screen. There's pluses and minuses to both of that. If you're using direct to speech recognition technology, it may not detect a voice if there's a lot of background noise. If the individual has an accent, it may struggle with that. And it's not going to tell you if the voice that you're hearing is particularly male or female. They may not be able to tell you if someone is laughing or shouting. Whereas a caption assistant will be able to determine those things and explain that during the captioning process. However, with a captioning assistant, the captions might become a little bit slower that show up on the phone. So there may be a somewhat of a delay if someone's using a caption phone and they're reading what you've said before responding to you. I'm sorry, my puppy just heard that UPS has arrived. So the screen itself on the phone is extra large. It has different caption options. So in terms of how big or small you want the letters to be, you can make the font bigger or smaller. You can change the color and the background if that is something that would make it easier for you to see. And you can slow down or speed up the captions if you need to. It does have a built-in answering machine, which also captions your voicemail messages, which a lot of people find particularly helpful. And it is caller ID capable. You can save and review captions at a later time. So if you've made a call to your doctor's office and you've forgotten what time you made your appointment, you can go back and check that on the call. And one particular feature that I particularly like is the one-touch button for customer care. So for example, if for some reason you have a power failure and maybe your phone loses the settings that you had on it and you're not really sure how to get those back, all you have to do is touch that one button for customer service and it will connect you directly there. You don't need to keep the manual or a telephone number around. So there are a number of different models of caption telephone. The 840 Plus is a traditional size buttons, and it looks pretty much like a standard telephone, except for it has a screen on it. The only thing that you would need for this device is a telephone service, so a telephone line, and standard electrical power. This would be great for someone who may be living in a facility that does not provide internet service or who prefers not to use internet service. The 880i is another type of model that we have. The screen is extra large for extra large font size. So we recommend this for someone who may have a corresponding vision loss as well. This one does require an internet or Wi-Fi connection. And then we have the 2400i, which has touchscreen navigation. It also has speakerphone and Bluetooth capability. So if an individual has a hearing aid that has the Bluetooth capability, they can connect to the call directly through their hearing aid, which they find very helpful because that hearing aid is tailored specifically to their needs. For this particular device, you would also need a wired or Wi-Fi connection. We're really excited to introduce our mobile CapTel app. So individuals who are using mobile devices can also access caption telephone. It has a lot of the same features that the actual telephone devices have. So captions on incoming and outgoing calls, voicemail with captions, call forwarding, and custom caller ID. You can customize the captions on the app as well, so you can make them larger or smaller, faster or slower, different colors as needed. You can access a call log and review the captions of calls that have been made in the past. And you can also view captions on a larger screen. So if you're using a tablet, for example, you can read the captions on your tablet while you're using your cell phone. So the equipment distribution program is super exciting. That portion of what we're doing here in Connecticut Relay, we can provide devices to people as they need them. And so devices that we can provide are things like amplified phones, which gets much louder than a standard telephone, large button telephones, CapTel devices, TTYs, VCOs, HCOs, and even mobile devices as needed. So who would qualify for the equipment distribution program? So it would be someone who is deaf, hard of hearing, deafblind, or who has difficulty speaking, a full-time Connecticut resident, first-time EDP applicant, and be at least 5 years of age or older. To apply for the equipment distribution program, you could visit RelayConnecticut.com, give us a call at 844-997-3529, or you can email ctrelay@hamiltonrelay.com, and we can get that application to you. So that rounds out this portion of our presentation. Super excited. Once again, Damian Saunders will be your outreach and equipment coordinator for Connecticut. His contact information is there. So if you have questions, feel free to reach out to Damian. One of the jobs that we do as outreach coordinators is obviously we spread information about Relay services across the state. So Damian will be happy to field any questions about future presentations, exhibiting at different events in the area, and even visiting places like senior centers, retirement communities, to reach out to folks directly who may really be impacted by Connecticut Relay services. So I thank you all very much for your attention today. I'm going to open it up to any questions that you might have. So feel free to throw them at me. And I'm going to stop sharing my screen so I can see your lovely faces.
Thank you so much, Jenny. That was interesting. Are there any questions for her, Damian? Feel free to unmute yourself and just speak.
What is the cost?
Fantastic question. There is no cost for any of the services that we provide. And I'm not sure about the equipment distribution program, Damian. Maybe you can shed some light. I know some states will provide at no cost. Other states go on a sliding scale. Do you know yet what is going on in Connecticut with that?
Sure, yet. I am getting training on it today and tomorrow. But from the micro training I did hear there was no cost. But
Yep.
again,
Okay.
I'm getting more information tomorrow, so I can, if you reach out to me, I can definitely provide that by the next couple of days.
Yeah. Yeah, that's typically EDP's equipment distribution programs do not charge for devices. Some devices do have a cost. So it really depends on what the user needs. But all of the services are no cost at all to the individual. The only thing the person would be paying for is their phone line, which they're already paying for, but not probably using because it's too difficult for them to use. So that was a great question. Thank you.
That's fantastic.
Yeah.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, well, if there are no other questions, like I said, feel free to reach out to Damien. If you have questions for me specifically, I'm going to put my contact information in the chat as well. So if you have any questions about my presentation, feel free to reach out to me. I appreciate it. Thank you guys so much. And thank you very much for the work that you do. It's so important.
Thank you,
Thank you for
everyone.
joining us today, both Jenny and Damien. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, of
Thank
course.
you.
Thank you.
Thanks
Look
again.
forward to talking to you.
All right. So